Picture this. You're sitting in a boardroom. The walls are lined with degrees, certificates, and fancy titles. The table is crowded with shiny shoes, tailored suits, confident grins. People who have mastered the system, played by its rules, and won. These are the made-it people. Then, out of nowhere, someone speaks. It's a younger voice, not dressed the same, not speaking the same polished language. And they ask a question, simple, honest, but deep. The kind of question that doesn't insult, doesn't provoke, but slices straight to the root of everything the room has been built on. And suddenly, silence. You can feel it. The air shifts, eyes dart around. Someone coughs, another fidgets, but no one answers. Not because the question was dumb, because it was too real. What you just witnessed is the most ancient threat to power. The presence of a mind that can't be controlled. A self-educated mind. Because make no mistake, these minds don't scare the elite because they lack credentials. They scare them because they lack dependency. They aren't tethered to the same gatekeepers, the same stamp of approval, the same invisible rules designed to keep thinkers in check. They move different. They ask the kind of questions no curriculum would ever touch. They think with a kind of freedom that can't be bribed, bought, or bullied. And that right there? That terrifies anyone whose identity is rooted in conformity, disguised as success. Niccolo Machiavelli saw this centuries ago, the godfather of political realism. He understood something that still unnerves the powerful to this day. Real power has nothing to do with titles or institutions. Real power is the ability to think clearly, independently, and without permission. And when someone has that, they become unpredictable. And nothing frightens a system more than a wild card. Let's be clear. In every society that wants to keep itself stable, knowledge is never just knowledge. It's filtered, curated, packaged through universities, licenses, media, governments, all under the claim that this is how we keep standards. Machiavelli would have laughed. He said the point isn't to enlighten people, it's to manage them, not out of cruelty, out of survival. Because the moment people start thinking for themselves, that system starts to crack. So what do rulers do? They domesticate ideas, not just censor, but contain. Wrap knowledge in rituals, exams, certifications, until people confuse real understanding with official recognition. And that's why the self-educated are a problem. They don't wait to be told what's important. They chase what feels important. They don't learn to impress. They learn because they must. Their curiosity isn't structured, it's volcanic, raw, messy, urgent. They aren't after clarity for a grade. They're after clarity because it helps them breathe. And that's dangerous, because they often arrive at uncomfortable truths the system was designed to avoid. They speak in a language not polished for institutions. They don't care about academic camouflage. They might not look the part, but they carry the truth. And when they speak, something shifts. The room feels it. That uncomfortable gap between authority and insight, between wisdom and approval, between knowledge and permission. And that's why the elite resist them. The system isn't built to honor truth seekers. It's built to reward loyalists. It praises people who follow well, not people who think deep. It's not about originality, it's about predictability. So, when someone steps in uninvited, questions the script, and holds up a mirror, they don't just disrupt the room, they threaten the entire structure. They're the variable no one accounted for, the glitch in the system, the heretic who didn't kneel before the altar of credentials. And deep down, that's what rattles the elite. Because self-educated people are living proof that you don't need the system to understand the world, that you don't need anyone's approval to matter. That insight doesn't come from authority, it comes from courage. And once that truth spreads, the hierarchy starts to tremble. This is the Machiavellian nightmare. Not revolution by fire, but revolution by clarity. Quiet, independent minds who've tasted truth without being spoon-fed. People who read because they're starving for meaning, not because there's a test on Friday. People who think not because they're told to, but because not thinking would feel like betrayal. And once you've learned like that, without permission, you can't be controlled the same way again. See, the fear isn't just about what the self-educated know. It's about the kinds of questions they ask. While most are climbing the ladder, chasing the next title, they're the ones standing back, asking, why does this ladder even matter? They're not looking for a shortcut to win the game. They're asking if the game is even worth playing. And that is terrifying to a system built to reward obedience. Because when you start questioning the rules themselves, when you're not arguing for a higher seat at the table but questioning who built the table in the first place, that's not ambition. That's insubordination. They don't follow assumptions. They interrogate them. Why is success measured by money? Why do we glorify titles? Why do we hand over our self-worth to institutions, applause, and approval? Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. He wrote that every power structure survives by guarding its legitimacy. Not its goodness, not its efficiency, but its right to exist. So when someone dares to ask, who gave you that right? They must be dismissed. Not because they're wrong, but because they're too right. And the self-educated, they don't need to shout. Just by existing, they question the whole game. They don't wait for degrees to feel qualified. They don't chase permission to speak. They don't seek titles to validate their minds. They build their value from the inside. And that's dangerous, because when you stop needing external validation, you stop being easy to manage. That's when you become a threat, not because you're violent, but because you're free. And society has a playbook for people like this. It doesn't scream at you, it whispers. You're too intense, not a team player, difficult to work with. You lack soft skills, you're not a culture fit. Translation, you don't need our approval, and that makes us uncomfortable. But these labels aren't really feedback, they're shields, reflexes, a system's way of defending itself from someone who doesn't play by its rules. Because here's the deeper truth. The self-educated don't just learn differently, they see differently. They were never trained to confuse authority with wisdom, never taught to assume prestige equals truth. Or if they were, they unlearned it fast. Because their education came with no applause, no ceremony, just failure, late nights, books nobody told them to read, thoughts nobody endorsed, truths that bruised before they healed. They didn't study theory, they studied reality. And in doing so, they gained something rare, perspective. The kind of perspective that lets you spot the script, while everyone else is still acting it out. Machiavelli, one of the most brutal realists in history, once said, "A wise man must know how to act the fool when necessary." Not because he wanted people to be fake, but because power is a performance. It wears masks, plays roles, trades in appearance. But the self-educated, they don't just act, they see. They know the lines are scripted, the costumes are chosen, the applause is rehearsed, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that right there, that clarity, is what makes the powerful sweat. Because the moment someone walks into the room who sees through all the layers, the image, the rank, the jargon, the room tightens up. They don't need to say a word. Just being there feels like exposure, like someone turned the lights on during a performance. And the elite, they don't know what to do with that, because the self-educated don't come to take your place. They're not interested in your throne. They're asking why we even need a throne at all. They don't want to climb the hierarchy. They want to understand if the hierarchy makes sense. And that, more than anything, is unsettling. Because most of society functions on performance. Titles, gestures, politeness, status games. The self-educated see past it, not out of arrogance, out of habit. It's how they learned, by spotting what others missed, by noticing contradictions, by surviving outside the script. So when they speak, when they question, it feels sharp, even if it's soft, even if it's kind, because it hits where it hurts, the performance itself. And the saddest part, they're not trying to tear anything down. Most of the time, they're just trying to understand. But in a world addicted to shallow comfort, even understanding becomes dangerous. Even honesty feels like rebellion. So the response is rarely open conflict. It's quiet exile, fewer invitations, colder smiles, subtle distance, all carrying the same message. You make us uncomfortable. You're too reflective, too curious, too awake. But here's the truth. Systems don't reward independent minds. They reward compliant ones. The executives who color inside the lines, the managers who follow the manual, the leaders who never challenge the script. Brilliance isn't the threat. Disobedient brilliance is. And that's what the self-educated bring, because they can't not question. They can't not notice inefficiencies. They can't not ask why we're still doing things a certain way when it clearly isn't working. They don't worship systems. They evaluate them. And when they see a crack, they don't look away. They lean in and ask, who does this really serve? What is the cost of our silence? But that honesty comes at a cost, because those profiting from the broken structure will always fight to protect it. Machiavelli said it plainly. There's nothing more dangerous than trying to introduce a new order. Because the people benefiting from the old one, they don't just resist, they attack. And here's the irony. The self-educated aren't even trying to rebel. They're trying to help. They want to improve what's broken, make things work better. But that's the threat. Because power doesn't want better. It wants predictable. And improvement shakes the machine. The self-educated don't need permission to think, to speak, to create. They just do. And that's the part that cannot be tolerated. Because control depends on dependency. And when you prove you don't need the system, when you succeed without its blessings, when you build without its blueprint, you make the whole structure look optional. And that is dangerous. Look at the world. Some of the most impactful thinkers, artists, inventors, they didn't come from within the system. They came from outside it, self-taught, self-driven, unlicensed, and yet they shook culture. They changed industries. They made people feel something real, not because they followed the rules, but because they didn't need them. And every time that happens, it makes others question, if they did it without the system, why can't I? And if enough people ask that question, the illusion of control begins to fall apart. That's why self-educated people are discredited. Not because they're unqualified, but because they're uncontainable. Because they didn't kneel before the approved gods of status. They didn't ask for permission. And so, they're called amateurs, outsiders, arrogant, intense. But the truth? They're awake. And being awake in a world that thrives on sleepwalking is always going to be lonely. Because once you stop playing the game, once you stop seeking the gold stars and applause, you stop fitting in. Too curious for the mainstream, too honest for the comfortable, too thoughtful for the performative. And slowly people pull away. Not because they hate you, but because they don't know where to place you anymore. And that isolation, it hurts. Because the self-educated don't want to be outsiders. They just want truth, depth, meaning. And they're not willing to trade those for surface-level acceptance. Machiavelli lived that exile, dismissed in his own lifetime, understood only when it was too late. Because when you show people what they've been ignoring, when your questions remind them of what they've buried, they don't thank you. They resist. But here's what you must remember. Your solitude is not a weakness. It's a signal. A sign that you've chosen awareness over approval, truth over convenience. And if you are one of those people, self-taught, self-driven, deeply awake, don't fold to fit into someone else's box. Don't silence your questions to keep others comfortable. Don't pretend you don't care when you care more than most. You were not meant to echo the world. You were meant to challenge it. So stand your ground. Keep learning. Not to impress. Not to win points. Keep learning to stay free. Because once you realize you can think without permission, speak without endorsement, grow without validation, there's no going back. And there's no need to. You are not the problem. You are the beginning of the solution. And the discomfort you cause, that's not rejection, that's confirmation. You're getting close to something real, so keep going. Because self-education isn't a rebellion, it's a return to freedom.